This is our best non-fiction for the year.
Woohoo!
Let's get straight into it. Nell, would you like to go first?
No.
Fine. I'll go first. Know My Name by Chanelle, Millar.
Oh, so good. I think that was one of the last ones I read last year.
I read this as part of my Reading Booktubers Favourites video back in January or February or something. This was Smirty from Sant Reed's favourite, and I can see why. It was just... it was emotionally driven. Chanelle Millar can write. I really hope that Chanelle Millar goes and writes more books. I was not expecting her to be so eloquent and so concise and considered and well written. And honestly,
I was a little bit, because I read her statement at the time, and it was beautifully written. Well,
I knew nothing other than she was a rape victim. If she's got an interest in frogs, I will read her write a non-fiction book about frogs. It doesn't matter what the topic is, whatever she wants to write about. What one do you want to talk about next? I'm
going to talk about Overground Railroad, which was about the Green Book and its impact in the United States in the time when there were things like sundown towns and segregation and stuff like that. And this was really eye-opening to me because I just learned stuff. I learned bunches and bunches of stuff about the structural and legal obstacles put in the way of people of colour in America, and it was both horrifying and fascinating, especially after the release of that whitewashed horror show movie Green Book, which was stupid.
The next one I want to talk about, I've got 3 memoirs in my top 5, which I think is quite unusual for me, but I want to talk about Trevor Noah's book.
Born a Crime.
Born a Crime, that's what it was. Trevor Noah is a South African comedian. He is very funny in this novel, but this is not a funny book. Trevor Noah is the child of a black woman and a white man, which is illegal in South Africa, and he fits into a group of people in South Africa called coloured. They're not black, they're not white, they're coloured, they're something else. But because he was raised by his mother, he identified as black, and then because his mother worked hard, he got to hang out with the white people and he kind of looked a little bit white, so he identifies with all 3 of these groups. Then on top of that, he decided to study all these languages and learn all these languages, and he's had this really quite interesting life, and it's such a wonderful portrait of South Africa and the racism within South Africa, just told through this man's life. And also it's a really feminist book as well, because single mum, and he's got a lot of empathy for his mum.
Next on my list is Unicorn, which is also a memoir about a Muslim drag queen. It's sort of a coming of age, covers that most of his childhood, but also really focuses in on that high school to university, early 20 age, where you're embedding your identity. It was fascinating, super emotional, really uplifting in the end. I really enjoyed it.
This was one of my favourite books of 2020.
Yeah.
And again, this is like the Chanelle Millar one. I probably read Unicorn when you were reading Chanelle Millar.
And then we swapped.
But that, I just thought it was wonderful, and such a wonderful book about gender and feminism, really.
Yeah, and drag.
Again, one of these books that you didn't really expect to be that well written, but actually quite well written.
Yeah, for sure.
The Girl Who Smiled Beads is the last of the 3 memoirs. This is a story of Clemantine, who is a Rwandan refugee who escaped Rwanda and then had to deal with the refugee system in Africa for quite some time. And eventually she managed to move to America and become like a humanitarian worker, and she appeared on the Oprah Winfrey show. This book was really good for a few reasons. One, Clementine's sister Claire is just the most kick-ass character.
And it's just her sister.
It's just her sister, to the point of, if this was fiction and not non-fiction, I'd say this character is not realistic. She just...
They're too cool, yeah.
So refuses to be beaten by a situation. You have the utmost confidence that They don't have any water, they don't have any food, they don't have anywhere to sleep. They've just arrived in a refugee camp. And you know that Claire is just going to solve it. She's just going to fix it. And so that's cool. But because this because this non-fiction book, because this memoir rather, is written, it starts when Clemantine is 6 and it finishes and she's 29 or 30 or around that age. It talks about the effects that the experiences she had with their sister has on their relationship in the future. It touches on her sister's marriage with a man. It touches on the power imbalance between refugees and humanitarian workers. It's just a wonderfully... There's a lot less about Rwanda in this book than you're led to believe, but there's so much more about the refugee system and what it takes to survive the refugee system than you're led to believe as well. And that is the magic of it. And the observations that Clemantine is making in it are not the observations. They're not how hard this life is. They're not, I got beaten up here, I got raped here, I had to do this in order to be safe, blah, blah. That's not the observations she's making. At one point, she's talking to a humanitarian worker having survived and having gotten an education and having gone back to Rwanda. She's talking to an aid worker, and the aid worker sort of says, they want food and they want water, they want shelter, and then they're asking for a way to keep their pictures safe, their photos safe. And he's like laughing and scoffing at like, why is that so important? And she's like, of course it's important. Have you no empathy for these people? They have so few possessions. Of course they want to keep their photos safe. That's their memories. She was just able to write it with empathy because it's her experience. And I just thought it was wonderful.
Mouse. We read both of these. It's a graphic memoir, I guess, about Art Spiegelman's father and his experience both in World War II and the concentration camps and afterwards. This was interesting to me, not just because of the content, but also the format. I really enjoyed it. It connected for me with some of the life story of my grandfather and also what I knew about the history, and it just sort of like filled in some detail and connected dots and gave me like a richer understanding of the actual human experience. I thought it was exceptional.
I thought it was a really good book too. That was number 6 on
your list of 5.
On my list of 5, that was number 6.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about my favourite book because there's one book that we have in common, and I suspect it's your favourite book.
It is also my favourite book, yes.
But my favourite book is Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb, which is not...
Yeah.
This is a book about how rape is used as a weapon of war. And as somebody who reads horrible books all the time and really enjoys reading horrible books...
Scott likes a bit of trauma with his novel.
I do like a bit of trauma, not just with my novel, with my non-fiction as well.
Yeah.
This was next level. This is comfortably the most horrible book I have ever read. I mean, content warning rape, content warning war, everything else will not seem to matter after that. And when I say rape and war, I mean
rape because of war. Rape as a weapon of war.
I don't mean like it's not every day. Like it's just the most depraved, horrible, dehumanizing rape that I have ever read about, and there is no taboo.
Yeah.
I thought I knew what the worst things I could think of were, and somebody
has better ideas than you. Somebody
is more creative than me, and not just more creative than me, that they've also done it.
Yeah.
There was at one point the women in this region were just saying, we don't mind when the soldiers come in and rape us. Come in, rape us, we go to the stream, we wash ourselves off, we go back, we farm our corn, we get on with our lives, we hope we don't get pregnant. That's okay, just do that.
Yeah.
And like, when you're accepting rape because the thing is so much worse.
Yeah.
And like, not just like, just so cavalierly accepting it.
Yeah.
So I thought that it was a really, really worthwhile read. But I don't mention content warnings. We're bad at it. I don't often realise that a content warning has been passed until I see somebody say, oh, you know, that book has got blah in it, you know. This one is not for everybody, but if...
yeah, I think very strongly consider whether you're in a place to read it.
And I really thought I was in a place to read it, and I considered DNFing it. It really pushed me. It was
literally everyone who reads it says that.
Yeah, it's such a worthwhile read that if you have the mental space for it, you should read it. And if you don't, you should not feel ashamed about that. There is no shame, even if that's just because you didn't get a good night's sleep.
10 Days in a Madhouse by Nellie Bly. This is a super short one. I actually read it in a bind-up where she does a similar sort of expose in box factories in New York, and that's got the horrific title of something like 10 Days as a White Slave in New York. 10 Days in a Madhouse, Nellie Bly gets herself committed, and she just does some observational reporting on how the mental institution in New York was operating and who was in there and what their sort of health and well-being was like and how they were treated and that sort of stuff. And then the follow-up one, she went and got employment in a box making factory where they used to be paid by the piece, and she spoke to a lot of people who were like super experienced, and she tried different locations, and she reported on both the conditions and the financial reality of these women who would never be independent women working this job. In fact, it was almost like a net loss to work in these sort of environments, which I think anyone who's done piecework sort of still the same today, really. Her journalism style was really good, but her willingness to put herself in uncomfortable situations and just explain what it's like without necessarily going into the whys and all that sort of thing, I think was really interesting and valuable as both a historical record, because it is quite a long time ago now, but also like as something to begin moving the wheels of change, because sometimes it's the bare bones report of like, we were too cold that needs to be addressed. And then Lucky Last,
Don't Touch My Hair is the best book about racism and anti-racism that I have ever read.
It was so good and so complicated, and I learnt so many things, and I had so many aha moments.
And each chapter is better than the last chapter. She starts off good and you think, well, she's gone in hard with her best facts, and then she builds on it. Just
so much information every like, you would not think that hairstyling would be something that has such huge knock-on effects in a society. It does. And really at the end of it, you're like, well, if this is the impact of hairstyling, you know, like what if someone wrote a book about food? What if someone wrote a book like where does that actually stop if this is the significance of something so simple?
I just thought it was so intersectional. She was talking about how the financial system is, you know, affects race differently. She's talking about sex. She's talking about all of these different issues.
Yeah, all through the lens of hairstyle. It's very good. I'm very much looking forward to. I have on my bedside table. I think it's called What Should White People Do? Emma Dabiri's
What White People Can Do Next.
Yeah, that's her next racism book.
We read this as a buddy read with Mel from A Book Fiend named Mel.
That's it. That's non-fiction.
Let us know what your favourite non-fiction book of the year was.
Yeah, I'm specifically looking for non-memoir non-fiction to tackle this year. So if you've got some good titles in that sector, please leave them in the comments so that I can add them to my TBR.
And I want to read some history non-fiction this year, because I don't think I read a single
historical
non-fiction. Specifically, if we can go from somewhere that isn't North American or like Western Europe, that would be even better.